Alright, it's time to get back to Rwby. So, in the time I've been gone, Rwby has officially been sold to Viz Media. Nothing new other than that has come out, it's just been bought, so now all that transition is going to happen, and then it'll probably take a bit before anything actually comes out afterwards. So, today I want to go over Rwby's initial world building. So, we're going to be referencing pretty much only what we would know at the very start of the show, as well as the 4 initial trailers. So we're going to start big and we're going to kind of zoom in from there. So the very first thing, the largest thing there, is going to be the map. Just by physical size, obviously the world itself is kind of the biggest thing in Rwby. And Rwby's map was generated via coffee stain. That's not a joke. It was a coffee stain on a napkin. Obviously, it probably got a couple of changes, but really, it just goes to show off that when it comes to map making, it does not need to be a complicated process because for the most part in a story, you aren't staring at a map. So if you just kind of want to wing it off of, hey, this thing looks cool, that works out perfectly fine. Also, as a cool little side note, if you look at it long enough, you'll eventually notice that there's 2 dragons on this one. It doesn't mean anything. There's just 2 dragons, so like it's fun days. So zooming in a little bit, we have the 4 kingdoms. They are Vale in the center, Vacuo over in the west in the desert, Atlas up in the North Pole, and Mistral over in the east, kind of on its own. So the kingdoms both are and are not what you would expect from a kingdom. So while they are the central authority, and that authority is fairly absolute, who actually runs the place changes depending upon which kingdom you're in. So I think only Mistral has a true king, with Vale and Atlas having councils, and Vacuo kind of just being a conglomeration of thieves. We never really get a good look at Vacuo. But for the other 3 kingdoms, they are all run by a council in some way or another. How the council members are elected or placed into their positions is not clear, but they are put in there and as a result run the government that way. Now, what we do get a look at is 3 of the 4 schools, and we are told about Vacuos. So the 4 schools are Beacon for Vale, Haven for Mistral, Atlas for Atlas, and Shade for Vacuo. And to start with Vacuo again, Shade is the real power in Vacuo, kind of by virtue of being the only group to ever consistently hold it together. Everyone else, being a bunch of thieves, kind of comes and goes, so Shade is the only consistent group, making them the de facto power. So in Vale, Beacon Academy is more or less just a school. While the headmaster, Ozpin, does have significant influence, he does not seem to actually run Vale. Now, that said, he does seem to hold more direct power than Haven Academy's headmaster, Leo Lionheart. And this is kind of shown off in that Leo has to ask the council for huntsmen, whereas Ozpin has some directly under his control. And finally, Atlas Academy is more or less a military academy, meaning it's functionally just another branch of the government. So while its graduates don't have to go into the military, they fairly overwhelmingly do. So the next one on the list is a staple of anime, which is cat girls. I'm only mildly joking. They're called the Faunus, and they are all kinds of animal hybrids, but yes, they are animal hybrids. So the Faunus are essentially humans with animal traits. So if you were a cat girl, for example, you might have cat ears as well as being able to see in the dark. However, it also seems to affect their personality traits in that a cat girl is susceptible to red laser pointers. And the Faunus are described as being heavily prejudiced against in certain locations. So while some kingdoms, the one we start out in, Vale, aren't particularly against the Faunus, other ones more or less outright hate them, or see them as lesser creatures. And speaking of lesser creatures, we have the other unusual inhabitant of the world, which is the creatures of Grimm. And yes, it is Grimm as in the Brothers Grimm from fairy tales. That's going to come important later. And essentially, these are monsters. Now, these monsters look an awful lot like animals. So there is, for example, the Beowulf, which is an awful lot like a werewolf. There's an Ursa, which is functionally just a giant black bear. but they are all colored black. Whether it's fur, feathers, or skin, it is solid black, except for their eyes and any exoskeleton bones. So their eyes are always red, and as they gain power, there are more bones that show up outside of their skin, and those are white with red highlights. They exist exclusively to destroy humanity and the faunus, and other than that, appear to be completely mindless. And here we get a bit of a divide in the world building. So everything before this has been very large scale, very much the world at large. And from here on out, it's all going to be focused in on individual characters. So even though some of it has teams, it's all about characters. So speaking of teams, the teams are all divided into groups of 4. This is a school thing, so every school makes teams of 4 students. These teams are all given a name. The main team we spend time with is Team Rwby, spelled Rwby, and this comes from the first letter of the first name of its 4 members: Rwby Rose, Weiss Schnee, Blake Belladonna, and Yang Xiaolong. These are also very conveniently the 4 title characters. Gee, I wonder how that happened. Now, for anyone who's noticed, these names seem a little peculiar, and that's because every name is based off of a color, including the team names, with the exception of Ozpin, but we don't know why. So that means if you're making a fan character, as many people did, it has to either be directly related to, or invoke the feeling of a color. So, for example, Rwby is a ruby, which is red. That's her whole character color. Weiss Schnee is German for white snow. Blake gets her name from the color black, and Yang Xiaolong is a sunny little dragon. And now we get to what I personally believe is one of the absolute coolest parts of Rwby, which is the weapons. So first off, every weapon is named. So Ruby's is Crescent Rose, sticking with the red motifs. And it is a sniper rifle sight, which normally is a horribly impractical thing. You would never do this because it makes it a heavily unbalanced weapon for various reasons. But in Rwby's terms, weapons run off the rule of cool. If it looks cool, it works. And I'm okay with that, because it very much commits to that. For every weapon, if it looks cool, it will be cool. But it also inspired a phrase, it's also a gun, and that's because everything is a melee weapon and a gun, except for Weiss's, but we'll get to that. So Yang's are shotgun gauntlets, and Blake's is a pistol, sword, cleaver with a ribbon that makes it a combo, so she's actually got 4 in 1. So for Weiss, she has a rapier that is loaded with something called dust. And dust is essentially magic. However, it is not the only kind of magic in Rwby. See, Rwby has 3 types of magic. There is aura, semblance, and dust. And dust is a very consistent form of magic. There are types of dust, such as fire dust, which it doesn't matter who you are. If you use it, the effect you will get is fire. Then there is their aura, which think of it as kind of a personal health bar / shield. Everyone has a certain amount of it, but how much you have varies person to person. It is used to activate dust, as well as protect yourself, and use your semblance. And your semblance is basically your own personal superpower. And the only thing we really know about these powers is that everyone has one, and it's different per person. However, this means that semblances and dust have a very interesting interaction. So Weiss, who is the mage of the party, can change what her various attacks do by invoking a different type of dust. So she typically uses ice, but if she were to switch it to fire, things would start exploding very quickly. And all that kind of loops me back around to Team Rwby. So Rwby was constructed as basically a D&D party. So Monty outright said that when building Rwby, he thought, in team balance, what would he want? So Rwby is the ranged character, Weiss is the mage, Blake is an assassin, and Yang is a brawler. And that's all very much reflected in their weapons. Rwby has a sniper rifle, Yang's a boxer with shotguns, Weiss uses magic, and Blake is very much a ninja. although she's not the only one. However, this is not where the inspirations for Team Rwby end. See, Team Rwby also are all based off of fairy tales. So Ruby's should be the most obvious, as Little Red Riding Hood. Weiss is Snow White. Blake was Beauty and the Beast. And Yang is Goldilocks. Now, I kind of want to go into my opinions about all of this. So, at this point, to me, the world at large, or the first third of this video, doesn't really matter to the story. It's there, it's present, we learn about it, but it doesn't have much of an impact. And that's fine. We don't really need to know everything going on in the world to care about 4 characters. But when it comes to those 4 characters, everything matters. So for Yang, she is Yang Xiaolong, a sunny little dragon, and we find out later that her father's name is Tai Yang Xiaolong, which just means sunny dragon. She has blonde hair as she is Goldilocks, and if you dare touch it, she will kill you. She has a very short temper, and her fighting style reflects that. She has gauntlets with shotguns in them. That's not going to be very far away, and her whole plan is to get up in your face and beat the tar out of you. And her semblance feeds right into that. Whenever she's hit, she gets stronger. So Yang is in your face, and the only thing you can do is beat her back, but all that's going to do is make her stronger. And as long as her semblance is active, there's not much you can do to her. It will eat more or less anything you throw at her. But she's also the most reckless of the group. She outright is the only one with any kind of driving experience in that she drives a motorcycle. Her intro short is her walking into a nightclub and being hit on because she's just right, which is where the Goldilocks comes from again, physical proportions and all, and it immediately ticks her off. She starts a brawl in a nightclub at a serious disadvantage simply because people were hitting on her. And all of this informs the fan base around it. Because everything matters so much with these characters, every fan that is making a fan character feels rewarded for putting more effort, more thought into their characters. Sure, the weapons are basically rule of cool, but at the same time, you get to rule of cool it however you want. And you're rewarded for making your weapon match up with the rest of your character. The color design, the way their powers work, all of that feeds into each other. Even their names are a part of it. And this is extremely useful for audience engagement. As your audience and your watchers watch the show and they try to buy into it, they get more out of it. It sparked thousands of fan theories, especially in the early volumes. There's a point, I'll get to it later, when we're told we've seen a character's weapon and nobody knows what it looks like. And it goes insane. It gets referred to as a bunny bomb. And this all gets snowballed extremely hard to the point that Rwby is considered the first American anime. And the way it gets that designation is anime is a one-way pipeline. It is made in Japan, it is shipped to America. Rwby breaks that pipeline hard. Rwby is the first series made in America that is shipped to Japan. And that is an accomplishment in and of itself. See, the Japanese market doesn't like to be invaded by outside players, mostly because it thinks it's better than everybody. So for a series to be dubbed the first American anime and to break into the Japanese market as an anime is insane. And that's all based on the fact that, again, the more you buy into this story, the more you get out of it. And there's not a lot of shows that can do that. So that's going to be where I leave you for today. Y'all have a good night.